First contact and fatal assumptions. In the crystalline chambers of the Drachnid High Command, Supreme Commander Vexthor's scaled fingers drummed against the obsidian table as he studied the holographic projection of a seemingly unremarkable blue planet. Earth had finally caught the attention of the galaxy's most ambitious empire, but not for the reasons its inhabitants might have expected. Primitive, Vexthor muttered, his inner eyelids clicking as he blinked. 300 years of space exploration, and they haven't even established a proper lunar colony. Around him, the advisory council nodded in agreement, their silver robes shimmering under the artificial light of the command center. The Drachnid Empire had spent millennia expanding across the galaxy, incorporating or subjugating countless civilizations. Their methodology was precise, scientific, and had never failed. Evaluate a species' technological progress through their visible infrastructure, assess their military capability through their space presence, and calculate the resources needed for successful annexation. Scientific Officer Melara stepped forward, her ceremonial armor catching the light. Supreme Commander, our deep space monitoring has detected no evidence of military spacecraft. Their orbital installations are primarily civilian in nature. Communication satellites, weather monitoring systems, and basic research stations. She paused, mandibles twitching in what passed for amusement among her kind. They still use chemical rockets for most of their space launches. But Intelligence Director Kralvac, always the cautious one, raised a concern. There's something odd about their development pattern. They achieved nuclear fission nearly a century ago, yet they've barely weaponized it. They mapped their own genome decades ago, but haven't attempted widespread genetic enhancement. They have the theoretical knowledge for antimatter production, but haven't scaled it up. It's as if they're deliberately holding themselves back. Vexthor dismissed the concern with a wave of his hand. Primitive species often develop unevenly. Remember the Centaurians. Advanced biotechnology, but no grasp of basic robotics. Humans are simply inefficient in their progress. He zoomed in on the holographic display, highlighting the planet's major population centers. Their cities are unshielded. Their military installations are visible from orbit. They broadcast their entertainment and communications openly, without even basic encryption. The strategic AI's assessment appeared on their neural displays. 98.7% probability of successful conquest with minimal casualties. The humans had no unified planetary government, no space-based weapons platforms, and their most advanced fighters still relied on aerodynamic lift within an atmosphere. Their nuclear weapons, while numerous, were primarily ground-based and could be neutralized in the first strike. Prepare the invasion fleet, Vexthor commanded. We'll follow standard protocol. Take out their military infrastructure first, then their government centers, and finally their industrial capacity. They'll surrender within days, just like all the others. As the council chamber emptied, only Intelligence Director Kralvac remained behind, studying the holographic Earth with unease. Something about this didn't add up. A species capable of understanding quantum mechanics, yet still using internal combustion engines. A civilization that had mapped dark matter distribution across their galaxy, but hadn't built a single military installation on their moon. He accessed the cultural database, scrolling through human entertainment media. They called it science fiction. Stories about space warfare, alien invasions, interstellar conflict. The humans had been thinking about these scenarios for centuries. They had imagined countless ways their world might be attacked, and countless ways to defend it. Yet they had implemented almost none of these defenses. Either they were impossibly naive, or Kralvac filed his concerns in a formal report, knowing it would be ignored. The invasion plans were already in motion. The fleet would launch within days, and the Drachnid Empire would add another world to its collection. Just another routine conquest. The silent response. The first sign that something was amiss came 3 days before the planned invasion, though the Drachnid fleet commanders didn't recognize it as such. Their long-range sensors detected a slight increase in global communications traffic from Earth, but nothing that suggested panic or awareness of the impending attack. If anything, human behavior seemed remarkably normal for a species about to face annihilation. Admiral Zekskar, commanding the first wave of the invasion fleet, watched the tactical displays with satisfaction. 5,000 ships, ranging from city-sized dreadnoughts to agile strike craft, had assembled at the edge of the solar system. The humans' primitive detection systems shouldn't be able to spot them until they were practically on top of Earth. "Final status report," he ordered. "All ships report ready, Admiral," his executive officer responded. "We've detected no changes in Earth's defensive posture. Their military satellites remain in standard orbit. Their space stations are maintaining normal operations. Ground-based military facilities showed typical activity levels." "Excellent. Commence the approach." The massive fleet began its advance, moving in perfect formation through the outer solar system. They passed Neptune's orbit without incident, then Uranus, then Saturn. Each passing hour confirmed their intelligence assessment. Earth was virtually defenseless against a modern spacefaring military. Yet in his private quarters, Intelligence Director Kralvak was becoming increasingly disturbed by what he was seeing, or rather, what he wasn't seeing. He had expected some reaction by now. Instead, human activities continued with an almost suspicious normality. He pulled up his latest analysis of human communication patterns. Yes, there was increased traffic, but it was odd. The increases weren't in military or government channels, which remained steady. Instead, there were subtle spikes in civilian networks, particularly in something humans called social media. But when his eye analyzed the content, it found nothing about alien invasions or approaching fleets, just normal daily chatter. Too normal. As the fleet passed Jupiter's orbit, Admiral Zekskar received an urgent communication from the advanced scouts. "Sir, we've detected some anomalies in the asteroid belt. Several large objects appear to have slightly different trajectories than our astronomical databases indicate." "Natural variation," Zekskar dismissed. "Asteroids' orbits change all the time." "Yes, sir," the scout commander agreed. But what, Commander?" "Sir, some of these variations, they form patterns, almost like they're creating corridors through the belt." Zekskar studied the data himself. Indeed, several paths through the asteroid belt had been subtly cleared, as if someone had been very carefully nudging space rocks aside over a period of years. But their scans showed no artificial structures or engines attached to the asteroids, probably just natural gravitational interactions. The fleet pressed on. 3 days into their advance, they passed Mars. Here, finally, they expected to see signs of panic from Earth as their ships became visible to human detection systems. Instead, they saw something very different. Every human space installation, from the International Space Station to the lunar research outposts, began powering down. Not in panic or chaos, but in a carefully choreographed sequence that suggested extensive preparation. Civilian satellites adjusted their orbits in perfect synchronization. Ground-based telescopes went dark one by one. And then, most worryingly of all, Earth's internet went silent. Not from damage or attack. The Drachnids hadn't fired a shot yet. No, this was a deliberate shutdown, executed with precision and coordination that should have been impossible for a planet without unified government. In his quarters, Kralvak finally realized what had been bothering him about human technological development. They hadn't been advancing slowly. They had been advancing carefully, methodically, testing and perfecting each technology before moving on to the next, and perhaps most importantly, showing the galaxy exactly what they wanted it to see. He rushed to the Admiral's command center, his report clutched in his claws. But as he burst through the door, red alert klaxons began blaring throughout the fleet. "Multiple contacts," the sensor officer shouted. "Emerging from everywhere. Behind asteroids, from the dark side of the moon. Rising from Earth's oceans." Kralvak watched in horror as the tactical display transformed. Thousands of ships appeared seemingly from nowhere, their design unlike anything the Drachnids had ever encountered. They weren't the sleek, obvious warships of a young spacefaring race. These were warships designed by a species that had spent centuries thinking about space warfare before building their first proper military vessel. When the storm breaks, the first shot of the war wasn't fired by either fleet. Instead, it came from what the Drachnids had dismissed as a simple communications satellite. The seemingly harmless device suddenly oriented itself toward the invasion fleet and released a burst of energy that their sensors couldn't even categorize. Instantly, the quantum-encrypted communications network linking the Drachnid ships fell silent. Admiral Zexkar found himself experiencing something entirely new: confusion. His mighty fleet, the pride of the Drachnid Empire, was suddenly deaf and blind. Their ships reduced to using primitive light-based communications, even as thousands of human vessels closed in from all directions. "Impossible," he muttered, watching the tactical display update with increasingly dire information. The humans weren't just fighting back. They were executing a battle plan that had obviously been refined and practiced for years, perhaps decades. The first wave of human attacks came not from their ships, but from their primitive ground-based installations. Missiles launched from silos that had been monitored for decades suddenly demonstrated capabilities that defied physics as the Drachnids understood it. They didn't just rise through the atmosphere. They seemed to bend space around themselves, crossing vast distances almost instantly. "New contact types," the sensor officer shouted, his voice cracking with strain. "Detecting artificial gravity signatures throughout the asteroid belt. The asteroids, they're moving." Kralvac watched in horrified fascination as dozens of asteroids revealed themselves to be hollow, opening like massive steel flowers to disgorge swarms of smaller craft. The humans hadn't built obvious space stations or orbital shipyards. They had hidden their military infrastructure inside naturally occurring celestial bodies. But it was the human ships themselves that truly demonstrated how badly the Drachnids had misunderstood their opponents. They weren't the simple metal tubes the intelligence reports had predicted. Instead, they seemed to shift and change as they fought, their hull configurations adapting to each new tactical situation. When Drachnid energy weapons fired, the human ship's surfaces transformed to reflect or absorb the attacks. When Drachnid kinetic weapons launched, human vessels simply ceased to be solid at the point of impact. "They've been watching us," Kralvac realized aloud. "Every species we've conquered, every technology we've displayed. They've been studying it all, developing countermeasures, waiting for someone to make exactly this mistake." The human fleet's formation was unlike anything in Drachnid military doctrine. Instead of organizing into rigid battle lines, their ships moved in complex, seemingly chaotic patterns that nonetheless demonstrated precise coordination. They struck from impossible angles, disappeared into sensor shadows that shouldn't have existed, and demonstrated weapons technologies that the Drachnid Empire's best scientists had deemed theoretically impossible. "Admiral," the tactical officer called out, his voice steady despite the chaos around them, "we're detecting energy buildups in Earth's oceans. Massive ones." Before Zexkar could respond, massive pillars of water erupted from Earth's seas, reaching impossibly high into the atmosphere. But it wasn't water, it was plasma, contained and directed by electromagnetic fields of staggering power. The humans had turned their entire planet into a weapon. "Full retreat," Zexkar ordered, finally accepting the magnitude of their mistake. "Get us out of this system." But retreat proved as impossible as advance. The human fleet hadn't just appeared around them. It had appeared in precisely the right positions to cut off every viable escape route. The carefully cleared corridors through the asteroid belt that the Drachnids had noticed earlier. They weren't escape routes. They were killboxes. As his ships began to fall to the human onslaught, Zexkar received one final transmission from Earth. It was audio only, in perfect Drachnid language. "We are humanity. We have watched your empire expand, studied your tactics, and prepared for this day. You mistake our restraint for weakness, our patience for primitiveness, our careful advancement for technological inferiority. Today, you learn why we chose to develop our technology so carefully, why we never flaunted our military might. We are not your prey. We are your wake-up call. The counterstrike. The defeat of the Drachnid invasion fleet marked only the beginning of humanity's emergence onto the galactic stage. Within hours of the battle's end, human ships appeared simultaneously at 40 different Drachnid colony worlds, using technologies that made a mockery of known faster-than-light travel limitations. In the Imperial Palace on Draknar Prime, Emperor Vexthor received the reports with increasing despair. The humans weren't just defending themselves. They were systematically dismantling the Empire's military capabilities with surgical precision. Yet not a single civilian population center had been targeted. Not a single non-military installation had been damaged. How? He demanded of his assembled advisors. How did we not see this coming? A human representative had agreed to meet with the Imperial Council and now stood before them. Dr. Sarah Chen, her simple black uniform bearing no rank or insignia, seemed almost amused by the question. Your empire judges species by their most visible achievements, she explained. You saw our chemical rockets and assumed we hadn't mastered more advanced propulsion. You saw our satellite network and assumed it represented the extent of our space presence. You saw our divided nations and assumed we were incapable of unified action. She gestured, and a holographic display appeared, showing Earth's true defense network, hidden bases throughout their solar system, quantum entanglement communication arrays that couldn't be detected or intercepted, planetary shield technologies that had been tested and refined for generations in secret. We learned from history, Dr. Chen continued. Every time a technologically superior civilization encountered a less advanced one on Earth, the results were devastating for the latter. When we realized we weren't alone in the galaxy, we decided to avoid that pattern. We maintained the appearance of division while building hidden consensus. We publicly developed technologies in a logical sequence while secretly mastering more advanced concepts. We let you see exactly what we wanted you to see. The Imperial Council chamber fell silent as the implications sank in. Humanity hadn't just defeated an invasion. They had executed a centuries-long strategic deception on a galactic scale. What are your demands? Emperor Vexthor finally asked, expecting the worst. Dr. Chen's response surprised them all. We don't want your territory. We don't want revenge. What we want is reform. Your empire has dominated this galaxy through fear and military might for too long. That ends today. You will transition to a constitutional system with guaranteed rights for all sentient species. You will submit to oversight from a coalition of independent worlds, and you will learn to coexist rather than conquer. And if we refuse, then we'll simply disable your entire military infrastructure. We've already proven we can do it. The choice is yours, evolution or obsolescence. As if to emphasize her point, human ships across Drachnid space simultaneously demonstrated their power. Planetary shields flickered and failed. Weapon systems went offline. Military communications networks dissolved, not through violence or destruction, but through the application of technologies so advanced they appeared magical to Drachnid sensors. A new order. One standard galactic year after the failed invasion of Earth, the Drachnid Empire had transformed. Under human oversight, it had begun the difficult but necessary transition from an expansionist military power to a constitutional federation of worlds. The changes weren't easy, but they were irreversible. In the newly established Galactic Council chamber on neutral territory, representatives from 100 species gathered to sign the Treaty of Soul, establishing new principles for interstellar relations. The humans, having proved their technological superiority beyond any doubt, had chosen to use that power not for dominance, but for transformation. Intelligence Director Krulvac, now serving as the Drachnid Federation's chief diplomat, found himself sharing a quiet moment with Dr. Chen after the signing ceremony. There's still one thing I don't understand, he admitted. Why reveal yourselves now? Why not continue your deception? Your technological advantage would only have grown greater with time. Dr. Chen smiled, a gesture that Kralvac had learned to read over months of diplomatic interactions. Because we saw two possible futures, she explained. In one, we would continue hiding our true capabilities, watching as empires like yours conquered and subjugated other emerging civilizations. We would grow stronger in secret, but at the cost of countless species suffering under imperial rule. In the other future, we could force a change, use our power not to dominate, but to guide the galaxy toward something better. She turned to watch the representatives mingling in the chamber below. Species that had been mortal enemies mere months ago now engaged in peaceful dialogue. We chose to reveal ourselves to your empire specifically because you were the strongest, the most feared. By demonstrating our power against you, we sent a message to every other expansionist power in the galaxy. The age of conquest is over. Kralvac's inner eyelids clicked in understanding. You made an example of us. We made an opportunity of you, Chen corrected. Your empire had the infrastructure, the organization, and the influence to effect real change in the galaxy. All you needed was the proper motivation. The gathering below had taken on a festival atmosphere as ancient enemies found common ground and new alliances formed. Trade agreements were being discussed alongside cultural exchange programs. Scientific cooperation treaties were being signed between species that had once competed for resources through warfare. There's something else you should know, Chen added, her tone growing more serious. We weren't just protecting ourselves or other species from conquest. We were preparing the galaxy for something bigger. She activated a holographic display showing deep space telemetry data. There are things coming, Director. Things that make our recent conflict look like a children's game. We needed the galaxy united and technologically prepared. We needed everyone working together, sharing knowledge instead of hoarding it, building strength through cooperation rather than conquest. Kralvac felt his scales bristle at the implications. How bad? Bad enough that even humanity can't face it alone. That's the real reason we chose to reveal ourselves now. We don't have time for endless smaller conflicts and empire building. The galaxy needs to evolve, and quickly. As if to emphasize her point, the holographic display zoomed out, showing anomalous readings from the galactic core. Readings that shouldn't have been possible according to known physics. But then, Kralvac mused, humanity had already proved that known physics was a far more flexible concept than anyone had imagined. So what now? He asked. Now. Chen's smile returned. Now we do what humanity does best. We prepare, we innovate, we face the impossible, and find a way to overcome it. But this time, we do it together. The gathering below had begun to disperse, representatives returning to their worlds with new purpose and direction. The galaxy was changing, transforming from a battlefield of competing empires into something new, a unified civilization preparing to face challenges beyond any single species' ability to overcome. And it had all started because one empire had made the mistake of thinking humanity's greatest strength, their patience, their careful planning, their willingness to appear weak while building unprecedented power, was a weakness to be exploited. As Kralvac watched the sun setting through the council chamber's transparent walls, he couldn't help but wonder what other surprises humanity had in store for the galaxy. One thing was certain. The age of empires was over. The age of unity had begun. And somewhere out there in the darkness between the stars, something was coming that would put that unity to the ultimate test.